It was a long drive through the heart of nowhere. The kind of road that stretched for miles without a single sign of life. Snow, thick and white, covered everything in sight, and the sky, well, the sky was that dull, gray blanket that never seems to move. You know the kind I'm talking about, the kind that makes you feel like you're driving towards something, but you can never be sure what. Alex was at the wheel, eyes focused, hands gripping the steering wheel like he was on a mission. He wasn't saying much, but that was Alex for you. Always the steady one. Next to him, Jessie, flipping through her phone, though she already knew she'd lost signal an hour ago. She tapped the screen anyway, out of habit, I guess. In the back, Tyler was sprawled across the seat, grinning as he looked out the window at the snow-covered trees. The cold didn't bother him much. To him, this was all part of the adventure. The road ahead was empty, nothing but the long stretch of white and the wind that howled through the barren landscape. There were no other cars. No houses. No signs that anyone else had been through here in years. Just a lone cabin, miles from the nearest town, tucked away in a forgotten corner of the world. Almost there, Alex muttered, glancing at the dashboard. The GPS had cut out a while back, leaving them with just the map and their best guess. Says it's about 5 minutes up ahead. Yeah, if we're lucky, Jessie said, shaking her head as she stared out at the endless snow. I haven't seen a single house for miles. Are you sure we're in the right place? Relax, Tyler chimed in from the back. This is exactly what we wanted, right? No phones, no neighbors, just peace and quiet. It's perfect. Jessie shrugged, still unconvinced. If we freeze to death out here, I'm blaming you. The SUV trudged through the thick snow, tires crunching over the icy road, until finally, through the trees, the cottage came into view. It was small, old, the kind of place that might have been cozy once, but now it looked like it had been abandoned for years. The windows were fogged over, the roof sagging slightly under the weight of the snow. There was something about the way it stood there, alone in the middle of all that nothingness, that made it feel forgotten. Like time had just stopped. Alex parked the car, the engine cutting off with a low rumble. For a moment, no one spoke. They just sat there, staring at the cottage, listening to the wind howl through the trees. Well, Tyler said, breaking the silence, this is it. Home sweet home. They stepped out into the cold, their breaths turning to mist in the freezing air. Jessie pulled her scarf tighter around her neck, her eyes scanning the surrounding forest. The snow was falling harder now, swirling in the wind, making it difficult to see much beyond the trees. It was quiet, too quiet. No birds, no animals, not even the sound of distant traffic. Just the wind and the soft crunch of their boots in the snow. Is it just me, Jessie said, her voice barely a whisper, or does this place feel off? Tyler laughed, slinging his backpack over his shoulder. It's a cabin in the woods. It's supposed to feel off. That's the whole point. Alex led the way to the door, keys jangling as he unlocked the heavy wooden door with a slow creak that echoed through the silent woods. The air inside was cold, colder than they expected, and it smelled of damp wood and dust. The place hadn't been used in a long time. It was dark, too, the only light coming from the gray sky outside, filtering through the dirty windows. The inside wasn't much different from the outside, old, a little run down, but still, it had a charm. A stone fireplace took up most of the far wall, surrounded by a few worn armchairs and a faded couch. Shelves lined with books, their spines cracked and yellowed with age, stood on either side of the fireplace. The walls were adorned with pictures, black and white photographs of people who must have lived here long ago. Their eyes seemed to follow you as you walked through the room. Jessie wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. "We should get a fire going. It's freezing in here." Tyler, already on it, knelt by the fireplace, stacking logs and crumpling bits of old newspaper. Alex fiddled with the thermostat, but nothing happened. No click, no hum, just silence. "Looks like the power's out," he said. "Great." "Of course it is," Jessie muttered. "Because why wouldn't it be?" The fire caught quickly, crackling and popping as the flames flickered to life, casting long shadows across the room. The warmth was a welcome relief, though it did little to chase away the eerie feeling that seemed to hang in the air. As they settled in, the wind outside picked up, rattling the windows and sending a chill down their spines. The trees outside swayed in the wind, their branches scratching against the glass like fingers. The sound was unsettling, like something trying to get in. Jessie glanced toward the window, her brow furrowing. "Did you hear that?" Alex looked up from his spot by the fire. "Hear what?" "I don't know. I thought I heard something. Like footsteps. Outside." Tyler chuckled, but there was a nervous edge to it. "It's just the wind, Jess. You're already freaking yourself out." Jessie shook her head, still staring at the window. "No, I'm serious. It sounded like someone walking." Alex stood, walking over to the window and peering out into the darkness. The snow was falling heavier now, thick flakes swirling in the wind, making it hard to see anything beyond the porch. He squinted, but there was nothing there. Just snow. And shadows. "I don't see anything," he said after a moment, but his voice was tight, uncertain. "Probably just an animal." "An animal?" Jessie said, crossing her arms. "Out here, in this cold?" Tyler stood, stretching his arms and letting out a loud yawn. "Look, it's been a long drive. We're all a little on edge. How about we stop worrying about imaginary footsteps and just enjoy the fact that we have this place to ourselves for the weekend?" Jessie nodded, but she didn't look convinced. She stayed near the window, watching the snow fall, her breath fogging up the glass. They spent the next few hours unpacking, getting settled, and trying to shake off the cold that clung to their bones. The fire helped, but even with the warmth, the cottage still felt wrong. It was too quiet, too still, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the windows, seemed louder than it should have been. As night fell, the darkness outside became almost suffocating. There were no lights beyond the windows, no street lights, no distant glow from neighboring houses, just the black of the forest, swallowing everything. And then, just as they were starting to relax, there was a noise. A soft, rhythmic sound, coming from outside. It was faint, barely audible over the wind, but it was there. Thump. 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 Jessie froze, her eyes wide. "Do you hear that?" This time, they all did. Thump. Thump. It was getting louder, closer. Like footsteps, slow and deliberate, crunching through the snow. Alex moved to the door, his hand hovering over the lock. His breath was shallow, his heart pounding in his chest. Thump. Thump. It stopped. Silence. He opened the door just a crack, enough to see outside. The cold air rushed in, biting at his skin, but there was nothing. No one. Just the snow. The wind. And in the distance, at the edge of the trees, a shadow. Standing perfectly still. Watching. The wind howled like a restless spirit that night, whipping through the trees surrounding the old cabin where Alex, Jessie, and Tyler sought refuge. Outside, the snowstorm raged on, burying the landscape under a thick, relentless blanket of white. It was as if the world beyond their little wooden haven had vanished, swallowed whole by the swirling tempest. Inside, the fire crackled on the hearth, sending occasional pops and hisses into the quiet room. Despite the flickering flames, a chill permeated the air, wrapping itself around the friends like a heavy cloak. Alex sat near the fire, his eyes fixed on the flames, trying to convince himself that everything was fine. Jessie and Tyler were quiet, their faces pale, reflecting the growing unease that settled over them since their unsettling visit to the strange town earlier that day. Jessie was the first to break the silence. She glanced nervously at the window, her brow furrowed. "This place, there's something wrong with it," she whispered, her voice barely rising above the wind's mournful cries. Alex looked up, frowning. "It's just a storm, Jess." "We knew the weather would be rough," he replied, attempting to keep his tone light. But Jessie shook her head, her dark hair falling over her eyes. "No, it's more than that. The people in that town, the way they looked at us. It was like they knew something we didn't. Like they were hiding something." Tyler, usually the calm and collected one, sat forward in his chair, his fingers nervously drumming on the table. "I don't know what it is, but I felt it too. The whole town felt wrong. Cold. Not just the weather, but like there was something in the air, something heavy." Alex sighed, rubbing his hands together as if to create warmth. "We're just spooked. We've been driving for hours, and now we're stuck here because of the snow. Of course, it feels strange." Jessie's gaze remained locked on the window. "I keep hearing things," she murmured, almost to herself. "Voices. Whispering." The moment those words left her lips, a shiver crept down Alex's spine. He shot her a concerned look. "Whispering? Where?" Jessie hesitated, glancing around as if the shadows themselves were listening. "It's coming from outside, but it doesn't sound like the wind. It sounds like someone's out there, whispering, just at the edge of the trees." Tyler stood up, moving to Jessie's side. He peered out the window, squinting against the swirling snow. But there was nothing. Just the howling wind and the dark silhouettes of the trees swaying ominously. "Maybe it's just the wind through the trees," he suggested, though even he sounded uncertain. Jessie shook her head again, her voice growing more urgent. "No. It's not the wind. It sounds like voices, but I can't make out what they're saying." The three of them stood there in silence, listening intently. Outside, the storm raged, but the whispers, soft, insistent, seemed to dance around them, circling like predators. Alex felt his pulse quicken as he strained to hear, and the air felt charged, as if something unseen was just beyond the cabin walls. "Okay, maybe we're all just tired," Alex suggested, his voice wavering. "It's been a long day. Let's try to get some sleep, and we can figure things out in the morning." But as he spoke, the whispers grew louder. They weren't quite words yet, but they had a rhythm. A cadence that sent chills racing down his spine. Jessie backed away from the window, her eyes wide with fear. "Alex, we can't stay here. We need to leave. Now." Tyler's brow furrowed, his voice a low whisper. We can't go anywhere in this storm. The roads are already buried. We'd get lost. But Jessie wasn't listening. She shook her head vehemently. No. We need to go. We need to get out of here. Suddenly, a loud thump echoed against the side of the cabin, startling all three of them. It was a sound that cut through the tension like a knife, making the hair on their arms stand on end. What the hell was that? Alex whispered, his heart racing. They all stood frozen, eyes wide, listening intently for another sound. The wind screamed outside, but the whispers had quieted, replaced by an eerie stillness. Then came another thump. This time, it felt closer, right outside the window where Jessie had been standing. Tyler, his resolve hardening, grabbed a flashlight from the table. "I'm gonna check it out," he announced. "Are you crazy?" Jessie hissed, her eyes darting to the door. "You can't go out there." "We need to know what it is," Tyler replied, shaking her off. "It's probably just a tree branch or something. Maybe an animal." But deep down, none of them truly believed that. The thought of something lurking in the darkness made their skin crawl. Tyler opened the door just enough to shine the flashlight outside. The beam cut through the swirling snow, revealing nothing but the relentless storm and the black silhouettes of the trees. For a brief moment, it felt as if the darkness itself was alive, watching them. And then they saw it. Footprints. Fresh tracks leading away from the cabin and into the depths of the forest. The impressions were deep and large, suggesting something heavy had walked through the snow not long ago. Tyler's hand trembled as he slowly closed the door, his face pale. "There's someone out there." Alex felt his heart drop. "Are you sure?" Tyler nodded, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Yeah." And they were right by the cabin. The whispers had returned, low and haunting, wrapping around them like a fog. Jessie backed away from the door, shaking her head as if to dismiss the horrors brewing in her mind. "We shouldn't have come here. We need to go. I don't care about the storm. We have to leave." But before anyone could respond, there was another sound. A slow, creaking noise that reverberated through the cabin. It was unsettling, almost deliberate. It came from upstairs. The three friends stared at the ceiling, their hearts pounding in their chests. No one had gone upstairs since they arrived. The air grew thick with tension, and a sense of dread settled heavily over them. "Maybe it's just the house settling," Alex said, trying to reassure himself, though he didn't believe it. Tyler shook his head, his expression grim. "No. That wasn't the house." They stood in silence, straining to listen for the sound again. But the creaking had stopped, leaving only the crackling of the fire and the wind outside. Jessie took a deep breath, her voice trembling. "I'm not going up there." Tyler nodded, his face pale. "Neither am I." For what felt like an eternity, they remained silent, the weight of their fear pressing down on them. Then Alex spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "We need to stay together. Whatever happens, we stay together." As the night dragged on, the whispers began again, fainter this time, but still there, echoing through the cabin. They seemed to grow louder with each passing moment, curling around them like an insidious fog. Alex's pulse raced as he glanced at Jessie and Tyler. What if it's not just the wind? What if something, is trying to get in? Tyler scoffed, but there was a tremor in his voice. "Come on, man. It's probably just our imagination. We've been cooped up here for too long." But as he said it, the air in the cabin felt electric. The whispers swelled, almost like they were responding to Tyler's skepticism. They were insistent now, more distinct, twisting around their ears like a song they couldn't quite understand. Jessie's breath quickened, and she clutched Alex's arm. "I can't take this anymore. I feel like we're being watched." Suddenly, they all froze. From upstairs, there was a distinct sound, a soft thud, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps. The kind that sends chills racing down your spine. "What was that?" Alex whispered, his heart pounding. I don't know," Jessie stammered, her eyes wide with terror. Tyler moved closer to the staircase, straining to listen. "We should check it out. If someone is up there." "No. We can't go up there," Jessie interrupted, her voice rising in panic. "What if it's a ghost? What if it's one of those townspeople?" Before Tyler could respond, the footsteps resumed, echoing down the hall from the second floor, slow and methodical, as if whatever was up there was taking its time. The sound crept closer, and an overwhelming sense of dread washed over them. "Stay here," Tyler said, his voice firm as he grabbed the flashlight again. He took a step toward the staircase, but Jessie grabbed his arm, her grip tight and desperate. "Tyler, please don't," she begged, her voice shaking. "We need to get out of here." But before he could respond, a loud bang echoed from upstairs, a heavy thud that shook the walls and sent a shower of dust falling from the ceiling. They all jumped back, fear flooding their bodies. The whispers grew louder now, swirling around them, drowning out their thoughts. It felt like they were trapped in a nightmare, the boundaries of reality blurring as panic took hold. Okay, Alex said, his heart racing. "Let's just calm down. We need to think this through." But as he spoke, the whispers crescendoed into a deafening roar, drowning out his words. It was no longer just a murmur. It was a cacophony, a chaotic symphony of voices that screamed of madness and despair. "We have to leave," Jessie shouted, her voice breaking through the chaos. "Now." Tyler nodded, his face pale with fear. "But the snow." Before he could finish, another thud resounded from above, and then the light flickered. The fire crackled angrily, its flames dancing wildly before dimming. The room was cast into a flickering twilight, shadows stretching and twisting across the walls. Alex felt a surge of panic. "We need to go. Now." They rushed toward the door, but before they could reach it, the whispers reached a fever pitch, almost forming words, warning them, taunting them. "Stay with us forever." The words echoed in their minds, sending a cold shiver racing down their spines. Tyler hesitated, glancing back toward the stairs, torn between his instincts and the mounting terror in the room. What if we can't get out? What if we're trapped? As if in response, the door slammed shut, the wind outside howling like a beast. The friends jumped back, heartbeats racing, fear gripping them tightly. The whispers faded, leaving only an unsettling silence that filled the cabin. Alex's voice trembled as he turned to his friends. "We can't stay here. We can't let whatever is out there get to us." They huddled together, adrenaline coursing through their veins, fear etched on their faces. As the wind screamed outside, the cabin seemed to close in on them, the walls whispering secrets that were never meant to be heard. And in that chilling moment, they realized they were not just trapped by the storm. They were ensnared in a web of darkness, caught in a nightmare they couldn't escape. whatever was out there was watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The night wore on, stretching into a dark abyss of terror and uncertainty, as the three friends clung to each other, knowing that whatever awaited them in the shadows, it was far from over. And as the clock ticked ominously on, the whispers grew closer, weaving around them like a dark cloak. The shadows deepened, and the darkness was alive, ready to reveal its secrets. They would soon discover the true meaning of fear. The fire crackled weakly, its once bright flames now dimming as if the cabin itself was swallowing the light. Alex, Jessie, and Tyler sat huddled together, the oppressive weight of the night pressing down on them. Every creak of the old wooden structure seemed amplified, echoing through the stillness. The storm outside had only grown worse, the wind howling like a living, breathing thing, its icy fingers clawing at the windows. Jessie was the first to break the silence, her voice barely more than a whisper, though it seemed too loud in the otherwise quiet room. "We can't stay here much longer. Something's out there, watching us. I can feel it." Her eyes, wide and full of fear, flicked toward the window where frost clung to the glass, distorting the view of the swirling snow beyond. She could swear she saw something moving out there, just beyond the tree-line. A shadow, tall and grotesque, flickering in and out of existence as if the storm itself was playing tricks on her. Tyler stood up, pacing in front of the fire, his hands running through his hair in frustration. "We've got to do something. We can't just sit here and wait for whatever is out there to come for us. We need to leave." Alex, who had been silent, staring into the flames, finally spoke. His voice was calm, but there was a deep tension underneath it, barely contained. "Where are we going to go, Tyler? We can't walk through that storm. We wouldn't make it a mile in this weather." Tyler stopped and turned to face Alex, his face a mixture of fear and frustration. "So what? We just sit here and wait to die? We know something's out there. Hell, we've been hearing it, feeling it. If we stay, it's only a matter of time before it gets in here." Jessie pulled her knees to her chest, her voice trembling. "Maybe it's already inside." Her words hung in the air like a curse, the silence that followed only deepening the sense of dread in the room. Alex looked toward her, his brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Jessie shivered, though it wasn't just the cold. "I don't know. It's just this feeling, like we're being watched. Not from outside, but from within. Like there's something here, with us." For a moment, none of them spoke. The wind howled against the cabin, rattling the windows in their frames. The fire popped, sending a few sparks onto the stone hearth, but the warmth it provided felt like it was diminishing, like the cold itself was seeping in from the very walls. Then it happened again. Thud. A heavy, deliberate sound, coming from above them. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the old wood settling. It was someone, moving upstairs. Jessie's breath caught in her throat, her eyes wide with fear. Tyler spun toward the stairs, his body rigid, as if preparing for a fight. Alex stood up slowly, his legs shaking but his mind determined. "We need to check it out," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "We can't ignore it anymore." Jessie shook her head violently. No, we shouldn't." What if it's what, Jess?" Tyler snapped, his nerves frayed. "We're not safe down here, either. We need to know what's up there." Alex reached out, placing a hand on Tyler's shoulder. "Calm down. We'll handle this together, but we need to be smart. Whatever's up there, we don't know what it is." They exchanged a glance, the gravity of their situation fully sinking in. Tyler grabbed the poker from the fireplace again, gripping it tightly like it was his last line of defense. The three of them moved slowly toward the stairs. Each step felt heavy, the air around them thick with tension. The wooden planks groaned under their weight, and the sound of the storm seemed to quiet as if the world outside had stopped to watch them. As they reached the base of the staircase, they peered up into the darkness above. The hallway stretched out before them, dimly lit by the faint light from the fire below. Shadows danced across the walls, twisting and shifting in the flickering light. The thud came again. Closer this time. Directly above them. Tyler's breath quickened, his grip tightening on the poker. "It's in one of the rooms," he muttered, his eyes scanning the open doors at the top of the stairs. "I knew we shouldn't have come here." Alex nodded, his throat tight. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, each beat louder than the last. He took the first step, the creak of the wood beneath his foot sending a jolt of fear through him. Tyler followed, and Jessie reluctantly brought up the rear, her hands trembling as she held onto the railing. As they ascended the stairs, the temperature seemed to drop even further. Their breath came out in visible puffs, and the air felt damp, heavy with something unspoken. Each step was slower than the last, their legs heavy with dread. When they reached the top, the hallway stretched out before them in eerie silence. The doors to the bedrooms stood ajar, dark and foreboding. Alex motioned for them to stop, his hand shaking slightly. "We'll check each room," he whispered. "Careful, okay?" Tyler nodded, though his face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. Jessie didn't say anything, her body stiff with terror, but she followed closely behind. The first room was empty. The bed, untouched and covered in a thin layer of dust, sat against the far wall. There was nothing out of place. Just the lingering sense that they were not alone. The second room was the same. Empty. Silent. But when they reached the third door, the largest room at the end of the hall, they paused. The door was open wider than the others, swinging gently on its hinges as if it had just been moved. Alex felt a chill run down his spine. Something's in there. He didn't wait for a response. Slowly, he pushed the door open further, revealing the room beyond. It was darker than the others, the shadows deeper, more oppressive. The bed in the corner was covered in a thick layer of dust, and the window at the far end of the room was open, the wind howling through it. But that wasn't what made Alex freeze in place. It was the figure standing in the corner. It was barely visible, shrouded in shadow, its form twisted and unnatural. It didn't move, didn't acknowledge them, but Alex could feel its gaze, cold and hungry, boring into him. Tyler took a step back, his face drained of all color. "What the hell is that?" Jessie let out a small gasp, her hands covering her mouth as she backed away toward the stairs. "We need to leave. Now." But Alex couldn't move. His feet felt like they were rooted to the spot, his eyes locked on the figure. It didn't make a sound, but the air in the room grew heavier, colder, as if it was sucking the warmth out of the very walls. Then, without warning, the figure shifted. It stepped forward, just slightly, but enough to make Alex stumble back, his breath catching in his throat. "Go!" he shouted, his voice breaking the spell. "Get downstairs." Tyler didn't need to be told twice. He bolted for the stairs, his footsteps thundering down the wooden steps. Jessie was right behind him, her breath ragged with fear. Alex hesitated for just a moment, his eyes lingering on the figure before he turned and ran after them. As they reached the bottom of the stairs, the sound of footsteps followed them, heavy and deliberate, coming from above. The figure was following. Tyler yanked the front door open, snow blowing in as the storm raged outside. "We have to go. Now." But before they could step out into the snow, the whispers returned, louder than ever. "Stay with us forever." The door slammed shut, trapping them inside. The temperature dropped again, frost forming on the windows, the fire in the hearth sputtering out, leaving them in near darkness. Jessie screamed, her voice piercing through the cold air, but it was drowned out by the rising chorus of whispers. The cabin seemed to groan under the weight of it all, the walls closing in, the shadows growing darker and more sinister. Alex, Tyler, and Jessie huddled together, their eyes wide with terror as the footsteps grew closer, the whispers louder, until they were all-consuming. They had come here for a getaway, but now, it seemed, the cabin had other plans. And as the night wore on, the three friends realized they weren't alone. The storm wasn't just outside, it was inside with them. And it wasn't going to let them go. The fire was out. The warmth, the last remnant of comfort in the old cabin, was gone. Alex, Jessie, and Tyler huddled together, their breath misting in the cold, each of them silently dreading what they knew was coming. The whispers had filled the cabin now, no longer a distant, eerie murmur but loud, insistent, as if the very walls had a voice, commanding them to stay. The wind outside battered against the windows, but it wasn't just the storm anymore. There was something else. Something they had felt, something that had stalked them from the moment they stepped foot into this place. Jessie was the first to speak, her voice shaking. "We need to leave. We can't stay in here, it's worse inside now." Her eyes flicked toward the door, still locked tight as though the storm had trapped them within. Tyler, gripping the fireplace poker as though it were his last lifeline, nodded. "We need to make a run for it. There's no choice anymore. This place, it's alive." Alex, always the calmest of the three, stood frozen. His eyes were wide, staring at the shadows in the far corner of the room. "I think it's too late for that," he whispered. They all turned to look, and there it was, the same figure they'd seen upstairs. But this time, it wasn't just standing in the corner, shrouded in shadow. It was moving, slowly, deliberately, toward them. Its form was more defined now, a tall, distorted shape with long arms that reached out as though to welcome them into its grasp. Its face was still hidden, but its presence was suffocating. Jessie screamed, stumbling backward into the wall, her hands covering her face. Tyler took a step forward, gripping the poker tighter, but his arms were shaking. Alex didn't move. He couldn't. The whispers intensified, filling the room, overwhelming their senses. "Stay with us, forever." The voice seemed to come from every direction. It was in their heads, in their bones, chilling them to the core. The figure stepped closer, its dark form now just a few feet away. Alex finally broke the paralysis, grabbing Jessie's arm. "Run! Now!" Tyler moved first, bolting for the door, his movements desperate, driven by sheer terror. Alex dragged Jessie behind him, his heart pounding in his chest. The door didn't budge at first, as if the cabin itself was resisting their escape, but then, with a loud crack, it flew open, the cold night air blasting them in the face. The snowstorm outside was a blinding wall of white. The wind howled, tearing at their clothes, as they plunged out into the darkness. Behind them, the door slammed shut again, as though the cabin was angry to let them go. But they didn't look back. They ran. The snow was thick, up to their knees, slowing their movements as they struggled through it. The forest loomed ahead, dark and foreboding, the trees like tall, skeletal figures swaying in the wind. The cold bit into their skin, but it was the sense of something following them, chasing them, that drove them forward. Jessie stumbled, falling into the snow with a cry. Alex pulled her up, his breath ragged. "Come on, we can't stop." Tyler was ahead of them, moving faster, driven by sheer panic. "There's got to be a road out of here," he shouted over the wind. "If we can find the road, we can get back to the car." But the car felt like a distant memory now, like something from another world. The storm had erased any sense of direction, and the only thing that seemed real was the dark presence still behind them, always just out of sight, but there. They reached the edge of the forest, the trees towering over them, offering a brief shelter from the storm. The wind howled through the branches, but at least it wasn't whipping snow into their faces anymore. Tyler stopped to catch his breath, his face pale, eyes wide. "We've got to keep moving." Alex nodded, his hands shaking, not from the cold but from the fear that gripped him. "Yeah, but where? We don't know where the road is. We don't even know if we're going in the right direction." Jessie's voice was barely audible, but the fear in it was unmistakable. "I don't care where we go. As long as it's away from that thing." They began moving through the trees, their pace slower now, more cautious. The shadows in the forest were thick, and every sound, the snap of a branch, the rustle of the wind, felt like it could be something far worse. They had no idea where they were going, but stopping wasn't an option. The whispers, though faint now, were still there, carried on the wind, following them into the woods. Every now and then, Alex would glance behind them, half expecting to see the figure from the cabin standing among the trees, but there was nothing. Not yet. They trudged deeper into the forest, their breath coming in gasps, their legs aching from the effort. Time had lost all meaning. Minutes, hours, it was all a blur of cold and fear. The storm continued to rage around them, and the world seemed to shrink to just the three of them and the darkness ahead. But then, through the trees, they saw it, a light. A faint, flickering light in the distance. Tyler pointed, his voice hoarse from the cold. "Look! Over there!" Alex squinted, his heart leaping in his chest. "It's a house, or a cabin. Something." Jessie, her face pale and streaked with snow, looked hesitant. What if it's the same as the other one?" Alex shook his head, desperation in his voice. "It's our only option. We can't stay out here. We'll freeze to death." Without waiting for an answer, they started moving toward the light, pushing through the snow and the trees with renewed energy. As they got closer, the light became clearer, a warm, golden glow coming from the windows of a small cabin, nestled in the woods. Tyler reached the door first, pounding on it with his fist. "Hello? Is anyone there?" There was no answer. The only sound was the wind howling through the trees. Jessie looked at Alex, her eyes filled with fear. "What if no one's home?" Alex hesitated for only a moment before he reached for the doorknob. It turned easily, and the door swung open with a creak. Inside, the cabin was warm. The fire in the hearth crackled, casting long shadows on the walls. The furniture was simple, rustic, and there was no sign of anyone living there. "It's empty," Tyler said, stepping inside cautiously, his eyes scanning the room. "But someone was just here." Jessie stepped in next, her teeth chattering from the cold. "We need to warm up," at least for a little while. Alex shut the door behind them, his hand lingering on the knob for a moment longer than necessary. Something didn't feel right. The warmth of the fire, the coziness of the room, it felt wrong. Too inviting. Too easy. But they had no other choice. They gathered near the fire, their bodies slowly thawing from the cold. Jessie wrapped herself in a blanket she found draped over a chair, her eyes constantly flicking toward the window. "Do you think it's still following us?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Tyler shook his head, though he didn't sound convinced. No, we're safe now. We're far from that place." But Alex wasn't so sure. He stood near the window, peering out into the darkness. The storm had died down slightly, but the wind still howled through the trees. He couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. Then, without warning, the door slammed shut again. All three of them jumped, their eyes wide with fear. "What the hell?" Tyler whispered, his grip tightening on the poker again. Alex moved to the door, his heart pounding. He pulled it open, stepping out into the cold once more, but there was nothing. Just the snow, the wind, and the endless darkness of the forest. But as he turned to go back inside, something caught his eye, a figure standing at the edge of the trees. Dark and distorted, just like before. It was watching them. "Alex?" Jessie's voice was small, terrified. "What do you see?" Alex didn't answer. He just stood there, staring at the figure, knowing in his heart that no matter how far they ran, they would never escape. The whispers began again, soft at first, then louder, more insistent, as the figure stepped closer, its shadow stretching across the snow toward the cabin. The last thing Alex heard before the door slammed shut behind him was a single, chilling word. "Stay." And so, the night carried on, the storm swirling outside, and the three friends realized, in the end, there was no escaping the winter's whisper.